This video was originally recorded September 2017 at Tibet House, US in New York City.
It's a very, very venerable one, very much in the Tibetan tradition, which is to chant the so-called Heart Sutra. And, okay, and we chant a little bit in the Zen way. I don't have anything to bang with. I can use the glass. I don't have the wooden fish. I can do like that though. Okay, just think it's a wooden fish. That's what the Zen people do. And then they make every syllable like a separate sound. And don't just gold brick and watch other people chant it. Chant it yourself. Do you have the piece of paper? Everyone? Okay, hold it up. Okay. In Sanskrit, Bhagavati Prajna Parami. That's great, thank you. You know, that kind of Zen chanting is actually very good. You have to concentrate. And you can learn to, you know, you inhale, you keep saying every syllable, but you have to inhale at some point, right? So you inhale through the syllable. That and that, like that, you do like that, and then you can keep the rhythm. And that's very good. Actually, you know, how many of you have done mindfulness meditation practice at some point or another, in some way or another? Good, a lot of you have done. So, you know, mindfulness focuses on the breath, you know, which is the basic thing, and actually can be a very advanced thing also, and it's very good. But actually, reciting a mantra, and in the case of where you're doing it as a personal, you know, private, you know, you're meditating yourself practice, then you murmur it. I had a colleague who passed away a long time who used to translate that term japa as muttering. Seriously, he used to write, you have to mutter it, mutter. And muttering is kind of like a crazy person muttering. So murmur, I think, is good. You don't make a louder voice like we do in a group chanting. You murmur it so that your mind doesn't scatter with the sound. And it becomes the thing, instead of the breath, the murmuring of like omane beme hum, omane beme hum, omane beme hum, omane beme hum, like that. And then that's the thing you bring your mind back to, which your mind wanders away from, rather than just the breath, you know. And what's good about that is that one of the things that draws you away from when you're meditating on the breath, counting to 10, is the inner verbalization, you know, the internal monologue, as it can be called. And when you're saying a mantra, you're bringing speech, and then you're channeling the speech along the line of a mantra. And then particular mantras have particular good qualities. You know, they evoke, like Om Mani Padme Hum, the special Tibetan one, evokes. Where do we have an Avalokiteshvara? Oh, I don't see an Avalokiteshvara right nearby me. Well, behind me is Mrs. Avalokiteshvara, that is Tara, and the green Tara, you know. And Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Swaham Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Swaham Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Swaham Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Swaham. That's her special mantra. That anytime you're about to be run over by a bus or something, you call on that, and then you'll be swift, move out of the way. The bus will swerve, supposedly, I hope, if you have faith. And so that's a good practice, just by the way, you know. That's a very good thing to do, using mantra, you know. And I mean, you can say some English sentence if you want. You don't have to say some Sanskrit thing. Hello, how are you? Are you happy? Good. So here we are back into the Force for Good, which in honor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's activities, we call it that. In a way more, it's about the sources of the Force for Good. When I had Dan Goleman call me, he told me, well, but what he meant by, in his book that he wrote about the Force for Good, what he meant was the activities that aren't officially seemingly Buddhist, that are initiated by the Dalai Lama, like mindfulness-based stress reduction, calming yourself in a hospital or in a school, which they dissociate from being formally attached to Buddhism, because they wanted to get past school boards. They want children to have people to have access to that without having to be Buddhist. And actually, of course, you don't have to be Buddhist to practice lots of these things. It's not at all necessary. His Holiness recently, I liked it, made a lovely statement that I really loved, that I hadn't heard him make in just exactly those words, although he's been teaching like that for decades, in relation, I think, especially to some scandal in the European worldwide Sangha, some badly behaving, really nasty Lama behavior. And so he condemned that, His Holiness. And then he said, the Dharma doesn't belong to Buddhism. I like that. And meaning the teaching of the reality about what is the nature of reality, which really is what the Dharma is, And in that sense, those of you who have come to how many of you have been to other of these Force for Good talks in the past? Oh, good, a small number, but a lot of new people, that's nice. As I often say that, Buddhism, in a way, doesn't really fit for all of its practitioners in the category of a religion. And that's why, in fact, Buddhism in history never tried to stamp out Hinduism in India. It never tried to stamp out Confucianism or Taoism in China. Nowadays in the West we have Jew-boos. We don't have anybody calling themselves a Chris-boo that I know of, but probably I should try to be one. I'd have to back up a little bit. And I do like Jesus a lot, I'm just not into God that much. He's too grumpy for me, He always was when I was a kid. He would get grumpy and flood the earth, and send Mel Gibson out to make a boat, calling him Noah, was just all a little too much for me. But I always loved Jesus, although I thought he got a raw deal from his dad, Anyway, so because it isn't just a thing that you just believe something and then that's going to save you. The Buddha said that doesn't work. In fact, most acutely, what I think is Shakyamuni Buddha, that is, there are many Buddhas, infinite numbers, but Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical one, I love the paradox of his teaching where he said, oh yeah, I'm a Buddha, I know everything, I'm so happy about it too, but don't believe me just because I said so. He says that. You shouldn't believe me just because, Buddha's so cute, I like him, whatever he said, I must believe that. No, he said, some cuter person will come and tell you a bunch of baloney. Well, they won't know what they're talking about. So don't believe something just because somebody said it. You have to test it out, you have to investigate it, you have to try it out in your mind, some particular path or something. And then if you begin to get a good result, and if it makes sense to you, then you start giving somebody, a teacher, like credibility, but not just believing because they have some sort of pedigree, or they're called Lama so-and-so, or Roshi such-and-such, or whatever it is, or Professor such-and-such. You don't believe it, So again, that's not the usual religious thing, right? Right? The religious thing is you have to believe. Even the Four Noble Truths, the famous framework thing that Buddha taught in the beginning of his teaching, Shakyamuni, it was translated in English as Four Noble Truths, and Dembashi in Tibetan, Satya, Chatvarya, Satyani in Sanskrit, and that can mean truth, but it can also mean a fact or a reality. So you could also translate that as the Four Noble Facts, which would sort of de-religionize it, they can be facts. Because actually what it is in the pattern of a therapeutic or medical diagnosis. Right? How many of you know the Four Noble Truths here? I want to know where we're starting from. Oh, quite a lot of you. Really? If I did a pop quiz, you could list them in proper order? How many never heard of the Four Noble Truths or doesn't know what they're? How many doesn't know? Oh, nobody. Oh, good. Anyway, these four facts. The first one is the fact of suffering. So, I mean, believe in suffering. Nobody's saying that. We don't have to believe in it, just stub your toe and then you know about it. And it's just acknowledging, and also it isn't poor Pope Benedict. He thought Buddhists were all miserable. And he was very unhappy. How could anybody be so miserable as to think that everything is suffering, he said. He wrote that he wrote in John Paul's book, actually, and he said it himself many times. And because he mistook, the unenlightened life is going to be suffering. A life driven by delusion will be suffering, is actually what he said. Remember Socrates' famous statement? It's more drastic than Buddha's statement. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living, he said. Buddha never said the unenlightened life is not worth living. He just said it'll be frustrating, and don't try to gloss it over. And, as long as you insist, and of course he only said that because you don't have to be unenlightened. If everybody automatically had to be unenlightened forever, then, as the Dalai Lama once said, I don't know if he made that gesture, I remember it that way, but he didn't say that. But he said, if there was no way out of the suffering, and Buddha comes and announces that that life is suffering, he's just going like nya-nya. It's like going up to someone who's life in prison and saying, oh, you'll never get out of there, nya-nya. But that's so silly. Buddha said, the unenlightened life is suffering, and actually the enlightened life is blissful. It's nirvana, it's fine. And that's the real life. That's the life we really deserve, we really have. That's the reality, that's the higher reality of life. The unenlightened life is not unreal completely, but it's illusory, it's less real, luckily, you see. So it can be, you can trade it in on the enlightened life, and then you can cheer up. And that's the first thing. Then why is that enlightened life, why is it unenlightened and why is it suffering? Because we are confused, right? And that's not even, again, it's not to believe something, it's to take a look. Like right now, except for anybody in this room who might be enlightened already, which I'm not claiming to be, so don't worry, don't get nervous. Everyone in the room thinks that they're the main happening in the room, right? If you didn't think so, you'd think something was wrong with you even, right? Like, I'm here. Hey, actually, I knew someone who used to say, things can start now, I'm here. So we all think we're the center of the room, right? I'm coming to listen my talk, I'm listening to. And I think I'm giving my talk, I'm here, And actually then we subliminally immediately know nobody else agrees with us in the room, right? Who else agrees that you're the main person in the room? Or even that I'm the main person in the room, even though I'm talking, I'm supposed to be the teacher. Nobody. So then, who's correct? Who is the main person in the room? Is anybody? No. So we're all confused, actually. Now, since nobody else thinks I'm the main person, if I'm caught up too strongly in thinking I'm the main person, I'm going to be frustrated. Pay attention to me. What about me? We're seeing this on TV all the time nowadays, aren't we? Somebody who wants to be the main person on the planet. Look at me, right? And there's a few others, of course. I mean, it's not the only one, but it's a particularly egregious one. And brightly colored, I could say. And so we realize that that's completely demented, don't we? But we don't really realize that we're modestly and subtly and also kind of hiddenly demented by thinking that we're the main one. And then we talk to ourselves all the time like, oh, I'm going to go to Tibet House and get a lecture. This will help me. I'll learn something. I'll do this. It's an inner monologue like that. I'll get something out of that. Or then in the morning we wake up, what am I going to get out of the day? What about me? Like, in any situation, we constantly have an inner thing that goes on like that, which makes us miserable, actually, according to Buddha. And basically the misperception that you are the most important thing, you're the central thing, and therefore the most important thing. And of course, you can intellectually say, well, yeah, other people are, oh, sure, they're all there. But then, when it's every bodhisattva for himself, when the Titanic is sinking, then it gets like, then the underlying conflict of everyone is the center and no one agrees with anyone else emerges, right, doesn't it? Or in a war zone or in a famine or whatever, right? Although there, of course, always are more enlightened beings who will sacrifice themselves. They will put the other ahead of themselves. And that in itself is enlightenment, right then and there, even if they feel enlightened or not. That's being enlightened, being altruistic, And that's the definition of enlightenment, is being altruistic, actually. Not just somebody with a light bulb in their head, who goes around like looking all cute and shining lights and demanding Rolls Royces and like special privileges because they're supposedly enlightened. That's really actually usually nonsense, except in a few cases. And usually the enlightened one doesn't try to claim and act enlightened. Although, and Buddha sometimes says there's no such thing as a Buddha. Occasionally, like right here, it says there's no attainment. In the Heart Sutra, right, there's no attainment. And then he says there's no non-attainment. So, but that's at a high level, and we'll come back to that. So then third noble truth, so you have the acknowledging the symptom of the unenlightened life, looking at the cause of it, which is an exaggeration about the condition of one's being and the nature of other things as well. Then the prognosis is nirvana. And that's pretty nice, isn't it? Why do you think the Indian people liked Buddha and the Chinese people and the every people? Because he said, actually, the reality of you and your life in the world is nirvana, is blowing away this suffering, can happen. And particularly a human being has a very great opportunity to analyze themselves and realize that they are not the way they assume themselves to be, namely the center and the most important thing, They can figure that out if they investigate themselves. They don't just do it by believing I'm not important, then they would become kind of nihilistic and depressed. They do it by investigating whether they're more important, because everybody is important, of course. But that one is the most important. That's where the exaggeration comes in, right? And then the fourth one is then the method of therapy, the path, with its 8 branches, which is also can be broken down into 3 things: the 3 higher educations of ethics, of psychology or psyche, of mind, and of wisdom, which means knowledge of reality. So really the third education is an education in science, actually. So again, not exactly religious, The Buddha's thing is not based on some God telling him, I'm the God and you are my prophet and go tell everybody. In fact, God told him, yeah, I am God, but I don't know everything and I can't fix everything and I don't know what to do. So please teach me and teach the people. That's what God said to Buddha. He whispered to him, actually, that he wasn't really omnipotent and in control. He didn't tell him out there in his throne room, because he said if he did that, then the little God, the lesser gods, the angels would have a freak out because they thought he was daddy, and he was in total charge of everything. It's actually an ancient text, that incident. Okay, so that's a little run through, a little bit about 4 noble truths. What is Buddhism? So therefore, I met a fun lady just tonight who visited me, who's an Orthodox Jewish, but she loves Buddhism and studies it, and then she wanted to know, like, which thing can I study is good and bad, and I said, you have your rabbi, that one. But then she was a bit shocked when I said that she was fulfilling Dalai Lama's teaching very well, because Dalai Lama always teaches in cultures that are not Buddhist, and people who are not born Buddhists, he teaches that they should remain in their grandmother's religion, if possible, but they can learn from Buddhism. And if they can do something better about their mind, they can be more sensible philosophically, they can figure out some more reasons to be ethical, which are in their other religion, of course, all those ethical things. But Buddhism has a really great scientific psychology and biology and other things that you can fit in. You sort of fit into whatever cultural matrix you and grandma are in together. But don't become Buddhist. He says, I'm not trying to convert you. I don't want you to be Buddhist. He always says that. And then if I'm in the room, he'll look over and say, well, there's a few people, some people can't help themselves, and then I reassure him that I was really a secularist. But then that's no good. That doesn't reassure him even, because he considers secular humanism to be like a world religion. Because secular humanism is also, in fact, based on blind faith, in case you didn't know that. The faith that you won't exist after you die is unevidenced. There's no evidence for that. It's just a blind faith assertion. In case you believe that, you should re-examine, actually, as to the source. Did Einstein discover the nothing that people are supposed to enter after they die? Do you think? You think he discovered it? Is that why he got the Nobel Prize? For discovering the nothing? Is anybody going to ever discover nothing? Could there be evidence for the existence of nothing? Think about it. Could it be a place where you can go? Nothing. I don't think so. All right? Conservation of energy. Okay, I'll get into that later. In fact, to me, that's the most important foundation of beginning to live a more enlightened life, is to realize that you're going to keep on living life forever. That's really important. And I mean, it agrees with most religions, actually, but not secular humanism. But are you going to live through your children, maybe, or you live through the monument you build, or the patents that you hold, or whatever, the Nobel Prize that you win. but that you're going to live forever. There was a movie on that premise, though. Did you ever see it? It was called Death Becomes Her, and had Goldie Hawn and Sigourney Weaver and a whole bunch of people. And they were wandered into Hollywood, into some house, and there was some like Egyptian-looking thing, very Hollywood, and then there was a elixir in a flask, and of course they greedily gobbled it down, and then they couldn't die. But they could have accidents and be injured, and get in the most horrible condition, but they couldn't die. And pretty soon they were like looking to how to undrink that elixir, when they were like, like this, all broken. That's a fun movie, actually. I really liked it. I haven't seen it. I don't know how good it really is, but it was a good topic. Okay, now I said that in this beginning part of the course this semester, the main text is this one that I like a lot, called the Sublime Continuum, and its explanatory commentary, which is a translation of the Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra Vyakhya in Sanskrit, which means what it says, but the word tantra really means continuum. It's not a tantric or esoteric text; it's an exoteric text, and the word tantra means continuum. That's all. That's why the word tantra is there. It may have some relationship to Buddhist tantra, in fact, but it's not overtly, at least, teaching anything about tantra. And this has an interesting story. Do you know the story of Asanga, the great Indian? He was a contemporary of Augustine in the West, and he was a great, a great scholar and a sage and a saint. He became a saint, and teacher and writer. Like one of the great, what the Dalai Lama considers another Buddha of a later generation in the lineage from Buddha. In India, around 400, he lived, 4th century. And although dates are not exact, because Indian dating is very difficult. So he was a well-known teacher in Buddhism and meditator, and he was a kind of adept and highly respected. But he was very dissatisfied with the condition of the Sangha, the community, the institution, in India at his time, about 800 years after Buddha's time. And he thought, well, everything is already decaying and degenerating, and people are not really putting things into practice, and they're not understanding it enough, and et cetera, et cetera. So maybe I'm going to go and make a special retreat, and I'm going to meet the next Buddha, Maitreya, because Buddhists think that when Buddhas come to a planet, they first hang out in a certain heaven near the planet. Not the heaven, because there are many heavens, actually, they believe, but a particular one. And in that heaven, they have a kind of Dharma center, very good infrastructure. The gods in the heaven don't necessarily go to the Dharma center because they're all goofing off, having fun and partying, and which is why it's better to be human than divine. because the gods just too much, they have 10,000-year jacuzzis and things like that. So they don't really want to study or meditate in that jacuzzi. They just into sort of pleasure, which ultimately is short-lived at the end of it, even though it's long terms in our terms, time terms. And he said, and the Dharma Center there, though they're really a lot of the great, there's a tradition in Buddhism, a lot of the great practitioners and scholars and sages, they love to go there with the future Buddha, and then they have more discussions, and dialogues and analysis of the world, And so he said, I want to invite him to come and manifest, because such a high-level being can manifest embodiments in other places according to Buddhist belief. So he goes to a cave and he meditates on Maitreya, and he basically is calling Maitreya, where are you? It's like he wants a vision like this, and then he wants to ask Maitreya, what can we do to kind of revive Buddhism? That's his motive, and because he's already a teacher. And he meditates for 3 years, and then he doesn't have a vision of Maitreya and gets disgusted and starts to leave. And as he's going down the mountain, there's an old man. I mean, you all know this story. I won't tell all. It's a shaggy dog story, literally. But okay, if you don't know, I'll tell you. It's a nice one. And he goes down, and there's a man who is sitting on he has a lump of iron, like a little iron rod, like a little short one like that. And he has a cloth, and he's rubbing, like shoe shining, rubbing the lump of iron. And so as Asanga's curiosity is piqued by that as he's going by, even though he's very despaired. And he says, what are you doing? Rubbing that iron piece of metal with a cloth. And the guy says, I'm making a needle. And then he says, well, you can't make a needle rubbing a piece of iron with a cloth. He says, oh, really? The guy says, and he holds up a little dish, and he has like 24 needles. So he says, oh, okay, I get the message. He goes back to meditate. Besides, he hasn't put enough into it, So then he's meditating. Then 2 more times he leaves like that, after 3 years. The second time he sees, I think, water dripping on a rock, and it's made a big bowl in the rock on top of which it drips, down the mountain. There's a huge bowl there. So he says, okay, drops of water eroding the rock. I'll go back again. And then the last time he sees a bird making a nest on a ledge, and where it comes in for a landing with the twig that it's making the nest, the wing brushes the rock, and it's cut into the rock. Generations of birds making it with their wing, just grazing the rock with the feather. So he says, okay, I went back. So 12 years. So then after 12 years, he's like, forget it. I don't care what I see. I'm not going back. Maitreya is like on vacation or something, or I'm too impure, or whatever it is. And I just forget. He just completely despaired and given up, dark night of the soul sort of thing. So he comes to the outskirts of a town. He doesn't really know where he's going. He thinks maybe he'll go somewhere and be a sweeper or something. And he sees a dog, a female dog, and who is coming like this, And then that dog has like maggots in its flesh, It's like all wounded and scabrous, and there's actually crawling maggots in its flesh. And it's really in a bad way. And he just becomes obsessed with looking at it. And like, this is terrible. Like, okay, well, all right, I can't see Maitreya, but what can I do about this dog? It's in really bad state. So then he sort of goes over to some trickling little polluted stream or something, and he thinks I can wash it off, And then maybe we go into town and find some medicine or something, whatever. And then he starts to do that, and then he notices the maggots. And the maggots are hopping around. They're kind of having fun there. Like little maggots slipping around. If I just scrape them off, they're going to die in the dust. That's not nice. I couldn't see Maitreya, but why should I go killing a bunch of maggots? So he thinks, okay, I know what I'll do. He has a brilliant idea. He doesn't go and form an ASPCA in India in those days. He takes an old shard of pottery or something with a sharp edge and cuts a small sliver of flesh from his thigh. Puts it down, gets a dog, and then he's going to get the maggots and put it on the flesh. And then I don't know where he thinks he's going to take the flesh. He's not really calculating too intensively. But temporarily, they're going to hop around on the flesh, and they'll figure something out. And then as he gets near to do it, he can't pick them up with his fingers. They're wriggling away, little maggoty things. So he says, well, I'll put my tongue on the up there next to the flesh of the dog, the scabrous flesh. Then it'll crawl on my tongue because I'm like more juicy than that dried out dog. And then I'll spit it down on the lump of flesh. So he goes and he's going like, somehow. And it's so funky he has to close his eyes. He goes like that. And then suddenly, ping, there's like a sound like that. He sits back and he sees like that, like a vision. Like it's Maitreya. And, oh, my Lord. He's like flips. He starts to bow, in the Buddhist way. But as he's coming up from the very first bow, he's like, where have you been all this time? He starts to complain, How come you made me wait 12 years? Where have you been? Like, I've been doing nothing but trying to see you for 12 years. So then Maitreya says, well, who was making the needles? Who was building the nest? Who was dripping the water? Who do you think? I was with you all the time, but you didn't have, I'm Maitreya. Maitreya means love. And unless you have compassion, you don't recognize love, he said. So that's why you just saw me now in this form. Finally you saw me as this funky dog. And then Asanga's looking very skeptical at this explanation, Doesn't really accept it there, because Buddhists are very critical-minded, even having mystical vision. And so he says, okay, I know you don't really believe me, so I tell you what. Just take me into town and show me off to the people. You're so happy now you can see Maitreya, revive the Dharma. So he said, okay, great. So takes the thing, comes in a little bowl like that size of that, puts it on his shoulder, runs into town. And then in town, and he said, behold, the Lord Buddha of the future is here. Everything, we're fine, we're saved, And they're throwing rocks and chasing him out of town. Because they see like a kind of hippie-like looking, scrawny-looking guy, all unkempt, like years of meditating, a bleeding leg, and a filthy dog on his shoulder shouting, it's the future Buddha. This is truly Summer of Love, 1967, San Francisco. And so he gets very despaired and discouraged that nobody else can see Maitreya, That means nobody else has the compassion. But then there's one elderly lady at a charnel ground on the outskirts of town. And she doesn't see the whole Maitreya, but she sees the dog, but she then sees a kind of jeweled foot, like a Buddha foot. Actually, that in the back of the room there is that golden Maitreya statue. And so she saw like a golden foot like that, made of jeweled plasma, the Maitreya body. And then Maitreya says, don't despair. And then Maitreya took him up to the Tushita heaven, magically, like took him up there with his special powers that such a being has, supposedly. And then typical in Buddhist mystical things like that, mystical stories, he sat him down and he dictated 5 books, striding away, and this is one of them. And this is, in a way, the most advanced one, really, the most beloved one. But they're all beloved, actually. And there are 5 books that he did. And then he came back to earth with the 5 books, and he promulgated them, and they did cause a big revival in India at that time. And then he wrote commentaries on them as well, because they were somewhat cryptic, So that's the story of this book, okay? It was written by, it was channeled by someone called Asanga from the Tushita heaven. Tushita heaven means the heaven of satisfaction, of full satisfaction, by the future Buddha through Asanga, okay? And the commentary supposedly is written by Asanga. And it begins, the first chapter is called the Tathagata Essence. Actually, one of its main themes is something called the Tathagata Essence, or the Tathagata nature, which is, Tathagata is a name for Buddha, and it is a name for Buddha that is emphasizing a Buddha's transcendent knowledge of the nature of reality, of the ultimate nature of reality, sort of the transcendent reality. Because even though that transcendent reality is taught in Buddhism as non-dual with the immanent or the ordinary relative reality, nevertheless, in a way, it's transcendent to it. So it's complicated. We'll see. It's not that bad, but it is a little complicated. There's a little bit of a paradox in that. But Tathagata means, because Gata is like in the mantra that we recited, the sutra, Gate, Gate, Paragate, that means gone, gone, very gone, very totally gone, enlightenment, all hail, is what that mantra means. And so gate is past passive participle of the verb to go, gam, in Sanskrit. So tata gata, so and gata in Sanskrit is also very interesting, because the verb to go is the verb that is used for understanding words. Notice that in English, our usual understanding word is a non-going word, it's a standing word, understand. And this reveals possibly that in Anglo culture is an authoritarian culture where understanding something is obeying something. I stand under your majesty, or I stand under God, or I stand under high priest. Whatever you say, however you indoctrinate me, I believe that. So I understand. I stand under that, right? Whereas in Sanskrit, it reflects a culture where understanding changes your world. When you have a new way of seeing the world, or seeing yourself, then you move into a different world. And so you go somewhere, you know, and it's something you actively do. It isn't something that you just obey somebody, you know, and believe in some slogan or some creed, you know. You personally change yourself by experiencing the nature of the world in a different way. And particularly, the most important thing for you to understand in the world, of course, is yourself. Because however you experience yourself, whatever you think you are, you imagine everybody else is the same. That's why paranoid person, you know, who's very kind of paranoid, frightened of others, and covering up a kind of strong feeling of fear and hostility toward others, perceives others as hostile and paranoid too. You know, they see everyone as looking at them in some bad way, and they're frightened of you. So never go rush up and hug a paranoiac, because they think you're trying to do a smackdown. Because we project into others the way we feel about ourselves. So if we understand ourselves, we suddenly see others in a different way. They say, you know. That's another interesting point. Okay, so I want to, however, you know, in Buddhist teaching, they always have what they call a root text coming from some, you know, I mean, unless, if you're a Buddha, then you can just talk, and because you're a root text. But if you're just a scholar like me, you know, a poor practitioner and a scholar like me, then you need that root text from someone who was more learned and enlightened, actually. And then you sort of unpack that and you use that as the thread. And they particularly, the way they taught things, they used memorization a lot. And the root texts of the great Nagarjuna or Asanga or others are often, you know, metric, rhythmic verses in the meter, and very elliptical, you know, compressed. You almost can't understand them completely just as they are, but you memorize them. Then you learn in a commentary from a teacher or from a book, a teacher in a book, and you learn what this cryptic verse that you memorized means. And then when you meditate on it, to go deeper than just sort of learning discursively what it means and knowing the expression, when you meditate on it, you have in your memory that the framework, the pattern, the insight pattern. Not that and this has to do with the fact that the verbal formulation cannot capture the insight, of course. It's a doorway for you to enter into the insight, which goes beyond the words. But the words are like a vector into the experience, which always trumps. I can't really use that word nowadays. which always overwhelms the verbalization thing, you know, the slogan or something. Because your experience will be beyond words, you know, which is, I mean, that's not a big mystical thing. You know, you can go get a really beautiful, shiny apple, nice ripe apple. We're in the autumn, we're in the apple season. And you can write a poem about it, you can do a chemical analysis, you can have like painting still lifes of the apple, and every kind of angle on the apple. And when you you bite into that apple, and it's a delicious, beautiful Fuji apple or whatever, then that's beyond words. That's it. You can't express every element of the joy of eating that apple. It's just, or even if it's a bad apple, it can be bad. But whatever it is, the experience is more than any words can convey of anything, actually. And precisely if people are too rapidly wrapping things in their words, they don't really experience them. They just sort of cover it over with their idea of what they experience, kind of, so they don't really enjoy it. Okay? So the Buddhists are very insightful about all that kind of thing. So, yeah, Tathagata essence, that's how I started it. So, and Tata means such, or thus. Tata means like that. And such, as you know, means like that. That means it's not quite that. Like, such as this pillar means something like this pillar, And there's two kinds of ways of expressing sort of ultimate reality. Thatness, or thisness, which is sort of the pillar itself is a reflection of nirvana if you see it, if you have a certain division. Or the pillar itself, what you see, the relational experience you have of the pillar, is eluded by what the pillar really is. So the reality of the pillar transcends your experience of it. And so you can only say such as this pillar. You follow me? And that isn't also a big mystical thing, although it is, in a way it is. Like we are all in a scientific education. You've had a little bit of it. We've all had. Some of us more or less than others. And that looks a really heavily solid concrete pillar with rebar in it and everything. I hope so. Hope it has some steel in it too. And yet we're told that in reality it's made of atoms, and the atoms have just a tiny little nucleus and some electrons, and it's mostly empty space. And it sure doesn't look like that to us. So that's if the atomic nature of the pillar was more ultimate, I think we tend to think that's more real. That's more really real than our superficial perception of it as a solid concrete, right? But however, we relate to it as a solid concrete without bothering ourselves that it's something more than that, some inconceivable bunch of atoms making up a solid concrete. And then what its true reality is something even more far out than the atoms. You'd have to go to quantum to figure it out, or to realize that you can't figure it out. But it's supposedly a Tathagata is a person who has understood the ultimate nature as elusive of any relative nature of that pillar, something like that. So that's right. And then the essence of that Tathagata, the Tathagata Garbha, the word Garbha, is an interesting word. And Garbha actually means a womb, but it can also mean an essence. It can also be a fetus. It can have many meanings. And the Tibetan translation is Ningbo, which means essence. But it is a womb. So it's a Buddha womb, you could also say, Tathagata essence. Because the womb is the essence of life, right? It's the source of life, isn't it? Of embodiment. So that's what this chapter is about. But it's sort of the beginning of the Sublime Continuum, is what that means. Sublime Continuum means the continuum of the soul, the continuum of the super subtle mind. You might have heard that Buddhism doesn't believe in a soul, and that would be wrong. Buddhism doesn't believe in a fixed, identifiably, never-changing soul. That's true. Just like the Buddhism doesn't believe in a fixed, never-changing nose. And that's why it says no eye, no ear, no nose. But Buddhism doesn't believe that nobody has a nose. It just believes you don't have a fixed, unchanging, absolute nose. And in fact, an illustration of that you can do yourself in a thought experiment, which I'll come back to, but just to briefly mention ahead of time, that none of us can find our nose. Cannot. We merely want to go like this. But of course, some portion of our finger, depending on how much strongly we're pressing, is touching on a portion of skin on the surface of the conventional nose, relative nose, and that piece of skin could be removed by a surgeon or an accident, and we would still have a nose. And in fact, everything we can do if we touch is not our nose, but somehow we attribute noseness to it, sort of arbitrarily. And like we say, the line here between nose and cheek, nobody said there's a line exactly somewhere. And on top of that, they would never get away with it because a line has no width, right? So a true line, therefore a line is actually not anywhere. There isn't anywhere because it doesn't have a width. It's not a small rectangle, a very narrow rectangle. And similarly, a point, any point we would touch has no size, so it's really not there, it's an abstraction. So you can do a thought experience like that, go down to atoms and subatomic particles, and your nose will dissolve under analysis. Which if you really do that thought experiment with strong concentration many, many times, everybody's picking their nose now to reassure themselves. But if you do that with a really strong, when you just do it like a verbal sequence like that, well, okay, great, fine, playing with words, you say. But if you do that and then it really develops deeply and meditatively, then it becomes a deep experience, like one of Einstein's thought experiments, and it will actually change the way that your nose stands out there on your face. It actually makes you more relaxed about your nose, especially as you grow older and the nose begins to a little bit sag, or if you're a heavy drinker and it begins to shine like Rudolph with a little red thing, like shiny nose, serious heavy drinker, And then you don't mind because it's something. It's a process. In other words, we arbitrarily define that's the nose, but it's a constructed process. It isn't like it's there as a thing in itself. Is the key point. And that's a deep point, actually. It's when you concentrate on it. Everything is like that, including a Buddha, actually, even. He begins, I bow down to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They always do that. The body of the whole treatise is condensed into these 7 Vajra topics. The Buddha, I'll go back to the different words. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The element, which is another expression for the essence. The element, that means the Tathagata element or Tathagata essence. Buddha nature, that's the same thing as what people have more widely heard of called Buddha nature. The enlightenment, the excellences, and last, the enlightened activities of a Buddha. So under these 7 topics, sort of the sublime continuum can be understood. And what is the sublime continuum? We could just say, just to demystify, sublime continuum means everyone has an infinite continuum. You did not come into existence when you were either conceived or given birth to, or whatever, the molecules or the gleam in your parents' eyes, wherever you want to be located, you did not first begin there. We all have, according to Buddhist biology, since you cannot solve the problem of the beginning of the world, actually, the beginning of the universe is an insoluble problem, the best thing is to recognize that it is beginningless. It's always been going on. That is the most elegant solution of the chicken and egg problem. It's just always been going on, and it's not a problem, actually. Why do cultures and people, and scientists, even supposed secularists, make a big fuss about their Big Bang, or Genesis, or all the Genesis types of stories in other cultures? Why? Because the human, delicate, sensitive human being feels insecure in their environment. Something might jump on you and gobble you down, in the old days, or whatever. So somebody might do something to you in the new days. And so they want to feel they're in a world that they can understand and control, and that it will fit with their idea of the world. And then therefore they often run into people who set themselves up as authorities by pretending that they know what's going on. And they say, and then the thing that really secures their authority is that they know where it all came from. So they know the beginning. And if you're sure, and furthermore, we are very scared about infinity or eternity. It makes a scary thing. Then there's no ultimate frame of reference. Then anything is possible, given infinity, or if that's the reality of the world. They're constantly saying, oh, there's 200,000 trillion stars. Well, just because they only can count that far. It looks dark after that. There's no light coming to them, they say. So they say 200,000. Although it's just an estimate, really, still. But there could be a dark space, Could all be inside a velvet sack in the dark. And then there'd be another 200,000 million somewhere else. It's ridiculous to claim that there's a limit to it. Even the word universe is kind of silly. There's one. One is only meaningful in relation to two or none. One, infinity can't be one because it's no boundary, it's not an entity like that. And we're scared of that. Human beings are scared of the ungraspability and uncontrollability of eternity and infinity, even though it's the normal logical thing. The logical thing is, it's not that important where it all came from. Point is, here it is, and what are we going to do about it, is the main thing, And then it turns out that beginninglessness has positive side effects. In a way, it's just a negation. So it's just saying that such things that people put forward in history, like the uncaused cause, something coming out of nothing, where would there ever be evidence of such a thing? They're just assertions. Somebody says, oh yeah, that makes sense. It couldn't go on forever, so it must be uncaused cause. Who says it couldn't go on forever? Who said? On what basis? Did they go somewhere forever and then decide that something else couldn't go on that far? It's ridiculous. It's just irrational, blind assertion to make you feel comfortable and under control. And actually, Buddha was very well aware of it. Therefore, Buddha, one thing he did, he never wrote anything once he was a Buddha, they say. But he drew a wheel on the ground in the sand, illustrating what he was talking about. And this was a wheel called the wheel of dependent origination, Tenshin Dewa Zhongwa. And then it has the different life forms and things like that. But it isn't like there's a beginning to a wheel. A wheel always goes round and round and round. It doesn't have a point in the wheel that you start the wheel. It's just always there. But in a way, he sort of satisfied the longing for knowledge of the beginning in a very tricky way, actually. He said, the world begins, for anyone in it, from ignorance, from their failure to know that it doesn't begin, actually. That it's beginningless, which doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that if they go into investigating their causes, they'll never get to a first cause. And therefore, if they want to say, I only was in this part of it or that, I never was anywhere else, that won't work. If you've had beginning of its previous lives, you've been everything already. There's no limit to what you've been. And therefore, there's a good compassion byproduct there. We've all been related to each other in infinite different permutations. And let's not stress on the bad ones, where we had terrible fights and problems or gobbled each other down as a dinosaur and a vegetable or whatever. Let's think of the good ones where we were each other's moms. That's what the Buddhists like to focus on. Because in ordinary self-centered and enlightened biology, the most altruistic moment that beings have is had by the females of the beings, where they give their own body over as a house for another being who, at the time they do it, they have no idea who that is. That could be another Republican from the past thing, or it could be a Russian, or it could be a Klingon. You don't even know. Now they're going to be human once they're in your body, and they're going to be working with the material of your and your partner's genes, but you'd have no idea who they were. That Mae West thing, I depend on the kindness of strangers. Every single one of us depended on the kindness of one initial stranger, which was Mom, who was a stranger at first in this life. And luckily, when she has made the big effort of getting us out of there, she's ready to feed us with her own substance. That's because that's the most altruistic thing. Dads are nice, but they can't give milk. Actually, they can. There's a few rare instances on desert islands and things, plane crashes, where this terribly inefficient little thing produced a little bit of like Greek yogurt, tiny bit. There's some rare events like that in human biology. I believe there are cases. You can Google it and see if that's right. I believe I read that. So, but the point is, so it's beginningless. That means we've all been everything, right? Except, in a way, maybe if we're not enlightened, in other words, we don't understand direct experience the real nature of things, which includes its relative nature and its absolute nature, its ultimate nature, then maybe we did it because we don't lose that once you get it. So therefore, that's one thing we haven't been. So we haven't been a Buddha yet. So but it's our ignorance that keeps driving us. this ignorance. And this ignorance is not just a failure to have counted the number of fish in the ocean, as they say. This ignorance is an active misknowing. It's like, I know I'm Bob Thurman, and that Bob Thurman is an unchanging, absolute identity that I have in here, and it's different from everything else in the universe, and so it's me versus the universe, and therefore I lose, but I try not to admit that to myself. I think I win when I get to be president or something, ha. So that's dealing with the issue of causation, Okay, so now, so the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and they're called Vajra topics. Now Vajra has a number of meanings. One is a diamond, one is a thunderbolt. And in a way, in the pre-Buddha Indian culture, Vedist, what I call Vedist culture, of the Vedic Aryan people who were dominant in India. It was not all the Indian people, it was actually a minority that moved in and controlled a larger majority, And interestingly, about 3,000-4,000 years ago, it was the beginning of a racist thing, actually. And the Aryan word the word Arya was a racist word for lighter-skinned people. It goes back that far, even in India. So those Vedas people, they had an idea that they had a god called Indra, who was like the king of the gods. He was the Zeus, he was the Odin, type father god. And they didn't necessarily think he was the only one, but he was the dominant one. And he had a thunderbolt weapon that was the most powerful thing in the universe. And with that, he would destroy their enemies, and he would, because people see lightning, and it smashes a tree or a house or a person. It's a pretty powerful thing. So it seemed to be the most powerful thing. So it was a symbol of power, and it was a violent symbol, and it was therefore a weapon, the Vajra. And after a long time, it became, and I think by the intervention of the Buddha in that culture, Shakyamuni Buddha, it still represents the strongest power in the Buddhaverse, in the multiverse, universe, whatever you want to call it, in reality. But it ends up being the power of love, actually. And in love in the sense of an infinite energy that can fulfill the needs of all sensitive life. And so then it's still a scepter that is held, that it looks like a little thing. You can have a cross one that looks like a cross, and you have one like this. I don't see, but you can see them it's a ritual implement to symbolize that. And that's where it then connects to the word diamond, and because diamond is the hardest substance, right? It can cut glass, it can cut anything, right? Diamond can. And it's unbreakable. It can't be broken by other things, relatively speaking, in theory. And therefore the power of love is like that. And then they have this expression they say, the clear light of the void, or the transparency of the void. And so that's the equivalent in Western physics, I think, of the strong force of the universe, which holds atoms together, and which you can tell that the physicists don't really exactly know what it is, since it only is described with an Anglo-Saxon word. Doesn't have a Greek name. It's just strong. Once they say strong, then they're not sure quite what it is. It's just strong. And then there's dark matter around it, and it couldn't be really holding that atom together except all these invisible things around it. So from Buddha's point of view, they think they do know what is the strong force in the universe, and it is this Vajra force, and it's an impersonal kind of love. I mean, love is defined in Buddhism as the will to the satisfaction and happiness of the beloved. The energy that seeks the happiness and satisfaction of the beloved. So that the universe, the ground of the universe is not nothing, but it's an infinite energy that is accessible to life. It doesn't do anything to life, doesn't create it. It's accessible to it, and it can fulfill any need that any living thing has, is the idea. So that's a very positive. So the Pope needn't have worried. That makes the Buddhists tend to be too complacent and fun-loving and lazy, actually. Since they think that the deepest thing is this clear light. But the clear light is not a bright light. You know, in the 60s, some hippies said this, oh, the white light, man. You know, the white light is a superficial light. This is a gray. It's a light that is not the opposite of the dark. It's beyond the duality of light and dark. And therefore, it's like glass or diamond. It's transparency. Better than clear light, the word transparency is almost a better word. But no word is good enough for it. It's an inconceivability, okay? So you can experience it, supposedly, but you can't. And we do experience it. Every time you sleep, you experience it. Every time you yawn or you faint, and definitely when you die, you experience it. But you somehow don't you don't experience it in the way where you recognize it, which we think that we can only experience something we recognize. Whereas actually we experience a lot of things that we don't recognize. And why is it called recognize? That means know it again. It means that we're fitting it into a concept that we already have. And we experience lots of things that we can't fit into a concept that we already have, but we don't notice them because we're so completely trapped in our network of concepts, which is actually good. It's bad, but it's good because we are so smart and we can use the concepts to analyze the concepts and become free of them. You know, your lioness on the veldt, you know, in Africa, she has a concept of dinner running by on four hooves with you know, and she doesn't have a word for that because she doesn't have language. She hasn't had time to chat with anybody because she's been too busy subsistence, livelihood, animal suffering. But she still experiences that thing. But, you know, she can't have a concept of the deer as being her best friend or the reincarnation of her former child or whatever it might be that would cause her to be less predatory, actually. Never mind. So what is Vajra about the topics? That means these 7 topics have the power of Vajra. They have the wisdom, love, power that's the deepest nature of the universe. And so they are doorways into understanding how reality is, and which is the only, or realizing how reality is, which is the only way in which one will discover true happiness, not just pleasure based on causal, circumstantial experience, but true happiness, which is you become, which is you. It isn't that something you have; it's something that you realize you are. That's the nirvanic type of happiness. You are happiness, you realize. It isn't, therefore you can't lose it. Therefore it's not suffering. It's not, ordinary pleasure which you can get out of certain circumstances is said to be called the suffering of change. They call it the suffering of change because it goes away, you need more again, It's addictive in that sense, and it's not endlessly satisfying. Okay. So then he has very technical, the commentary gets very technical. And it says, the Vajra-like topics, that is, the topics to be understood, are Vajra topics because of being the topics of the teachings. So topic is already still in the conceptual plane. They're like making this very explicit. Because these topics are difficult to realize by means of only the knowledge that comes from learning and critical thinking. They should be known as Vajra-like topics, whose inexpressible nature is to be realized by one's experientially discerning intuitive wisdom. So in other words, these are topics that you should learn and you should think critically about, but the learning and the critical thinking will not still enable you to realize them. And that's where then meditation works in Buddhism, is then when you have learned and critically realized something that flowed toward one from a consciousness of a being that is enlightened, like a Buddha or something like that, or at least more enlightened. You still can't get it just from the learning and the critical thinking completely. You can't realize it, in other words, because your realization has to be your own experience. And your own experience has to get into the inexpressible. So it's like this is not, again, highly complicated. the formula of the aspirin is not going to cure your headache. You have to swallow the aspirin, right? The apple experience, you have to eat it. The old analysis of an apple that you have forever. But you need a good analysis of what is a good apple, which are the better ones, which one is not poisonous or isn't ruined or isn't contaminated with some deadly Monsanto-produced demon chemical, et cetera, that's going to make you sick. All this analysis is very important to really enjoying, in a positive way, the apple. Because even if you enjoy a poisoned apple, the poison is not enjoyed by parts of your body that can't communicate with you, that are getting toxified. They can't tell you, oh, don't take that aspartame. Don't drink that diet-free Coke. Don't do that. That aspartame is really messing us up, and we're going to start developing mutant cells that are going to mess you up because we won't be able to control ourselves. And didn't you read Aspartame Company was originally owned by Donald Rumsfeld and pushed in during the Reagan era when the research about how carcinogenic it is was then thrown out? Didn't you know that? No, you didn't, and you drank that Coke thinking you weren't taking sugar. But your cells know, because there's a lot more in you that knows things than just your conceptually oriented little structure. But that's a very valuable structure because that's the one that can put itself in its proper place instead of letting it drive you around completely based on your ideas. The letters that express these topics are called sites, S-I-T-E-S, locations, because they are the means of teaching the path that leads to the attainment of that experiential realization. So are its sites. So they're like the doorways, in other words. Hence, since the topics are hard to realize and the letters serve as their sites, one should understand that the topics and the letters expressing them are the Vajras and the sites, respectively. So the Vajras mean the actual thing experienced, when you experience what a Buddha is, when you experience what the Dharma is, when you experience the Sangha, you experience your Buddha nature, you experience enlightenment, you experience the Buddha excellences, you experience the Buddha activities. That's when it becomes Vajra. Because actually you are Vajra, everything is made of Vajra in a way, sort of, but not particularly by anybody except by our delusion. But that's what makes it, never mind. Now, what are these topics and what are the letters? The 7 topics that are understood are as follows, or to be understood are as follows. Topic of Buddha, he's just repeating now. Topic of Buddha, topic of Dharma, topic of Sangha, topic of the element, topic of enlightenment, topic of excellences, and topic of enlightened activities. So today I know we're really basically on the Buddha, but then I'll read, and then he says, now you should follow this from the various sutra quotes. And sutra in Buddhism means, sutra comes from the idea of a thread. And there are various reasons why they call the utterances of the Buddha, historical utterances of the Buddha, which they believe are handed down for us in the texts, although for the first centuries they were handed down through these extraordinary memories that people had. And the Vedic people still have this memory, actually. Neuroscientists have studied living Hindu Vedist priests, and their memorization of thousands and thousands of verses handed down through a certain very elaborate metrical analysis to keep them the same, so they don't change, in transmission, is so huge that they have the hippocampus, where the memory is as bigger than a London taxi driver. Do you know about that? The proper official London taxi driver has an amazing hippocampus because in order to get licensed, they have to memorize all these really weird English streets and alleys and lanes and dead ends and everything, and they have this map in their mind that therefore the hippocampus is like this. That's why they drink so much ale, because it's blocking their blood flow. Otherwise, if they didn't, the big overinflated hippocampus. So the ancient time, they like Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and his close attendant, he was like an idiot savant in a way. I mean, he became enlightened eventually, but Buddha could talk for 2 hours and he would repeat it just like a tape recorder. It was known like that. And then every generation they found people like that and they did that. But Western scholars don't believe that, of course. They think, oh, they never can do that, or they made it all up later. Maybe there was no Buddha. That's a typical Western thing. Actually, I jokingly say my Western colleagues who study Buddhism, they know that Buddha couldn't have been enlightened because he didn't have a PhD from Harvard. What a joke. What a joke. Okay, so then he quotes a sutra, and he says, "Oh, Ananda," the Buddha is speaking to Ananda, his cousin and his attendant and his successor, actually, as a leader of the order after he passed away. "Oh, Ananda," Ananda means joy, by the way. "Oh, Ananda, the Tathagata cannot be shown, for he cannot be seen with the eyes. Oh, Ananda, the Dharma cannot be expressed, for it cannot be heard with the ears. Oh, Ananda, the Sangha is not created, for it cannot be served by body or mind." So they immediately pull the rug out from under us. I'm sorry, this is frustrating. We're trying to study what is the Buddha. Then they say, you can't express the Buddha. Can't see it with the eyes. There's one of my favorite sutras is one that I was lucky enough to translate by the request of someone. I probably wouldn't have chosen to do so. And it's an amazing sutra. And there's a scene at the end of that sutra, toward the end of that sutra, where Vimalakirti, who is this merchant but very wise one, takes his whole audience, which are thousands of people supposedly, and over to meet with Buddha, who is out of town. They were all in his house. He had a big house. And then he goes out of town to the grove where the Buddha is staying. And because they all said, they'd had a lot of teachings from him and a lot of special events and all kinds of things, artistic performances and dialogues, amazing dialogues. And then he says to them, would you all like to go visit with the Buddha? Wouldn't you like to go see the Buddha? They say, yeah, we want to go see the Buddha. So then he takes them all over there. And then when he's there with the Buddha says, oh, hi, Vimalakirti, how are you? Nice to see you. He says, that's great, nice to see you. And then he says, well, you came over here to see the Buddha, the Tathagata, Now that you see the Tathagata, what do you see? And then Vimalakirti goes into a long thing. Actually, I thought I would read that to you today, but never mind. I'm just telling you about it. He goes into a long thing about how I don't see the Buddha when I see a body. I don't see the Buddha when I see this, that. He goes through a long sort of negational paragraph, several paragraphs, of where everything that you can interact with is not the Buddha, in the sense that he's referring to what a Buddha thinks they are, and what your consciousness becomes when you become a Buddha. And what does that mean? Well, the human being, why the human being is considered a good vehicle, a good vessel of this teaching of a Buddha, because their evolutionary proximity to the Buddha condition is very, very close. More so than the gods even, although the gods are in some ways more intelligent and they're more lucky and powerful and so forth, and they're certainly more jolly because they're partying all the time. But they get more closed in on themselves in their endless rounds of pleasures, the gods, according to the way the Indians present them. Whereas the human is very vulnerable and is very, therefore human beings very much connected with each other, very social, and they have to band together to deal with a difficult environment sensitively. And the human has a very strong, very completely deprogrammable and reprogrammable being. And the gods really in a way are too, but they just don't have the motive to work on it. So any human can identify with another human as if and feel they were the same being. Like everyone has fallen in love, we call it. Where you become the other being. Everyone, maybe with a baby, maybe if it didn't work out with the mate, with the baby it does, and then even people on football teams, people in rock and roll groups for a while, buddies in a platoon in a war, people can expand their sense of identification, and people in a mob, in a riot, in a negative way, they become one being and they do things they would never do as individuals. Negative things, actually, and occasionally brave things, actually, in some settings in the world, nonviolent protest type of things, So this expansion of identification we know exists, right? We don't deny that we are capable of this, right? And someone who only can identify very narrowly and has no way to identify with anybody else, at the extreme of that, it's called psychosis. And actually all unenlightened people from Buddhist psychology are a little bit psychotic in that we're sort of more focused on just identifying with ourselves. We tend to be, you know, after that honeymoon, after mother's gold turns to regular crap, then it's harder to identify with the other, you know. So we withdraw back into identifying with ourselves only. But so Buddha is simple. Buddhahood is defined. This is definition of Buddhahood, right? Not some guy with a light, or even a guy who has a particular embodiment, although a perfect Buddha might show certain embodiments in certain cultures to attract the attention, the positive attention of beings they want to teach or help. They might manifest a certain type of embodiment. But it isn't the body. It is, you expand that sense of identification limitlessly. So just imagine now, just to get a sense of what that might be like, which each one of us here is like looking out of the eye at that being in the place inside our skin in the world, but in this room. But imagine suddenly you became simultaneously aware of everybody's perspective in this room, just the way you are of your own, looking out of your own face, like you were in everybody's face looking out of it, and in their mind thinking it. And imagine that, just imagine that. I mean, it's unimaginable, right? But technically, if you were deeply in love with someone, you might really see things from their perspective very intimately. Like a mother knows when that baby is just colicky, or when it really is hungry, or when it needs a burp, or whatever. The intuitive mother, of course, you might be saying, well, what does Dr. Spock say? It might be stuck in her inner monologue, but if she follows her intuition, she will know very accurately, precisely the condition of that other, because she's somehow empathetic with that other. So imagine you were that empathetic where even you're not sure which one you were of all of us here. In a way, you would lose yourself, you know, but you'd be in every self. And there would be sort of, you'd be a little bit unfunctional, I think, wouldn't you? Maybe. So it's kind of, so it's more complicated than even that sort of mind-expanding imagination. But technically, that's what Buddhahood is attained when a being identifies with the all of life in a visceral manner, not a conceptual one, not only a conceptual one, but viscerally. They feel they are all life. And even inanimate things, they feel they are everything. Like a CAT scan, vast cloud of awareness, you could say, something like that. And that seems incredible and unbelievable to us, and that's fine that it be so. On the other hand, if we reflect, since it's a venerable tradition and it comes down from that, and they say that's possible, and we know from having been in love at some time maybe in life, or observed others in love in case we've never had the pleasure of dancing in the rain with Gene Kelly, we know that we can expand our identification. We certainly know that. So in that case, then, well, maybe given infinite future, given the continuum, given that death is not the end of anything, just it's a separation of the sublime continuum with a particular body in what my friend John Perry Barlow calls meat space, which is the coarse reality that we consider the reality, but we know it isn't actually. Even just from Western science, we know it's not the only reality, but it's the one we identify through our five senses, right? But given that infinite and limitless future time, that one could expand one's identification so vastly, we sort of can entertain the causal possibility of it, let's say. Although it remains inconceivable to ordinarily, and Buddha even says he is inconceivable, so that fits with what we'll experience. So anyway, then also Dharma. So anyway, Buddha, therefore, meaning both awakened and also blossomed. You know, people like to translate sometimes, and people get into how, we had Enlightenment in the West and it was no good. It made people a bunch of rationalists, and they went around doing the Industrial Revolution, and they wrecked the planet and all that. We don't like Enlightenment, we like awakening. But awakening is part of it. But the blossom part is better covered by enlightenment. Because the blossom part is if you experience yourself as omnipresent in the universe, in the world, or Buddhaverse, they even call it a Buddhaverse, I call it, Buddha field, then you would know in an experiential manner how everything sort of was, because you would feel it was you. So it's a different kind of knowing. It's like that kind of knowing where there isn't a subject-object divide, where you stand back and you have a concept that's a picture and a painting on a wall, and I know that's a painting on a wall because it fits with my idea of a painting on a wall, my idea of a wall, and all kinds of things, wrap myself around that. But knowing by being the painting, like when you merge with what you're knowing, and you sort of know it experientially, that's a different kind of knowing. But that's so that's the enlightenment part. That's the blossoming part. So the Buddha feels they are all beings, and the blossoming is the compassion part also. Because apparently it's only possible to realize that you are all the beings when in a way you see through them all. They all become transparency. And because you see through yourself. So in a way, it's as if none of them exist in the way they think they do, as you don't. And then I'm in an area where you can't express it well, so please bear with me. But if you follow it, maybe give you a vector. And yet, if you sort of feel, and so therefore you see every being as just clear light. The whole universe is this freedom, clear light, bliss void indivisible, they even say, nirvana. So you see beings as if their cells are nirvana, their atoms are nirvana, their subatomic energies are nirvana, and they're configured as a being out of all of that. But in a way, that's a transparent being. It's like if you look who was that guy, that artist, not Coburn or Arnold or Cornell, that's right. And he made these little glass boxes with mirrored backs, and then he had with glass figurines in the box. And you'd look into the box. Joseph Cornell, he was an artist, well-known artist, and successful one. And you look in, and then when you look into this field with these transparent objects in the field, you can sort of just see through the field and then see your own reflection in the mirror, actually, because it's a mirrored thing. Or you can make your mind sort of stop and pick out the shape of a reindeer, a glass reindeer or a glass thing. You can also just see through the reindeer and just ignore it. Do you follow me? You can see in two ways, in other words, right? So if a Buddha means you are in a vast field of diamond energy, total, limitless, peaceful, brilliant, ecstatic energy, which has, when you perceive that as not something you newly made, or not a place that is apart from the ordinary world, because it is the ordinary world, but it's the ordinary world in its translucency, then you can also change the focus. There's nothing obstructing you from changing the focus to be perceiving one of the transparent figures there. And if the transparent figures are beings who don't feel they're transparent, they don't feel they're made of infinite energy and they're in nirvana, and who are like feeling all isolated and frightened of a vastness around them, and are feeling like, I should be, what about me? Like, what's it going to do to me? Who's going to ruin me? Or what are they going to give me? Or, they're like suffering, in other words, they're frustrated. You can't ignore that. You don't ignore that. Those mental things are just as part of this energy as the physical things. And so compassion then is not accepting that they should have to stay in that situation. Because their reality is already bliss, actually. They're already in nirvana, but their ignorance makes them feel it's a really bad scene. And so then you are this, you feel your oneness with this infinite energy that because it's infinite, it doesn't have a mood to do anything, it doesn't want to do anything, but it can fulfill anything that's wanted of it, you could say. So that's compassion. So that's where the wisdom of the knowing of the reality is indivisible from the compassion that wants to flow around and enfold the suffering of all the beings and heal it and let them. But unfortunately, you can't just make yourself into a bliss bomb and blow away all their ignorance, because a being that is really into identifying itself within its boundary, if flooded with an extreme energy, will become more tightly packed into its trying to uphold its boundary, and it'll get more and more compressed and more frightened and more upset. And it's going to have the opposite effect. It's like hugging a paranoiac who thinks you're trying to like crush them. You're trying to be friendly and give a hug, but I think you're trying to do something to them. The only thing you realize that they can do is they can use their own, Buddha nature, meaning their clear light nature, to open their mind to try to understand their own reality. And which will then open the door for them to understand the reality of the world. And when they understand the reality of the world, they will realize it's fine, it's all right. It's like fall of every sparrow. It's like, like Jesus or Hamlet said, or, Shakespeare said, or Buddha said, It's perfect. Already, always has been. And they've been imposed, somehow, this ignorance has just prevented them from the awareness of that. Something like that. But, that doesn't work, because you could find, if you analyze that, paradoxes and sort of contradictions in that. You can. The only thing that is not contradicted is the negation of the thinking that something is just really going to be there by itself. It's going to have its own independent reality as something. That's all. Like either a Buddha or a suffering being or me or you. It's intrinsically real. Intrinsic identity it has. Intrinsic meaning that the identity, sameness, unchangingness, fixedness, independent, comes out of itself. So it's a thing in itself, actually, you could say. Rather than whatever existent things are there are only existent by virtue of their interrelatedness with everything else. And actually, you can't even say that the boundary between the thing and the other thing is other than a sort of arbitrary habit or decision. And so all beings are kind of interflow, really, if they're really visibly seen that way. They're all interwoven, which we know that, We have, one scientist, a biologist at Oxford, actually, or he retired now, I think, but Rupert Sheldrake, who talks of morphic resonance, morphogenetic resonance, where we have vibrations, we feel the mind of others through the vibe, that they have, And that's a little bit the fact of no boundaries. Actually, I have a friend, just to show you how real this all is, who is probably retired by now, very eminent sociologist. Name was Peter Berger. If you ever did religious studies, any of you, he wrote many very famous books like The Sacred Pavilion and like Pyramids of Sacrifice, the Homeless Mind. I mean, he was really very famous and well published. He was a professor at Rutgers and then eventually chair of the sociology department at BU. And he was a friend of mine, and in the 80s we had a lot of dialogues, interreligious dialogues and inter-whatever dialogues, and I represented Buddhism, and we had all these dialogues. And then he would visit me sometimes, and he would meet some of my Buddhist friends, and at one visit he met a friend, a young woman, who was a kind of yoga teacher, and also mental yoga teacher, very accomplished, actually, and qualified, who taught the yoga of white Tara, actually, she taught. It's a beautiful particular type of Tibetan thing, of this picture behind me, white Tara. I think this is green, actually. Yeah, she's green. White Tara's legs are crossed because she's the healing energy. The green one has one leg down like this because she's going to come help you if you need help. That's the difference. But it's just, she's painted that way. It's not green color, but that's green Tara. Anyway, he liked her, and since he lived at that time, he was still at Rutgers, and he was in the city. She lived in the city, and she had a studio, yoga studio, and then on his own, I didn't know that, he went to study there, to take some lessons there. And I was in a class at Amherst College, in the evening class, and he had a phone call and urgent, emergency type thing. You know, the person who said there's this emergency phone call, someone's very, very upset, you have to come to the phone. So I went to the phone, I left the class, I went to the phone, and there it was, Peter Berger. And he says, Bob, I'm in a phone booth on 4th Street. And I went to the, what's her name? I can't remember her name. Elizabeth's class, Elizabeth's something. Elizabeth's White Tower class, and I was doing meditating, and my boundaries are slipping. So I said, it's all right, Peter. You're in a metal box with 2 feet by 2 feet. You can't slip too far. You know, and you might go up there and like experiment with sort of being aware of like a little expansion of your boundaries. You know, you never know in the class there. You know, the other students are managing to stay on their yoga pill. You know, and I gave them a little exhortation like that and said, okay, I'll try. I really like that. That was really memorable. My boundaries are slipping. I'm really in a yoga studio. Actually, that's why some people don't like yoga. Again, that Benedict, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, which was the Grand Inquisitor, you know, for John Paul, he was the Inquisitor before he took over himself, and for the short time that he did, fortunately short. And he said, yoga is bad for your face. He did. And then he said, karma is bad for your soul. And all kind of thing. Karma can be bad. Karma is definitely bad for your soul. That was prescient of him. It really was. So Dharma, okay. So then second, we'll come to Dharma next time. What time is it? Okay, I'll stop. That's Buddha. Then Buddha, they have all kinds of ways with their vectors of trying to express the inexpressible. So when you become a Buddha, you will be one with this clear light of the void sort of thing. You are nirvana. You feel your body is nirvana. You feel like this. It always has been, even you do. So you can remember infinite previous lives. You become, your knowledge expands endlessly. But you remain completely connected with all the beings through compassion who are not feeling as good as you are. And you become very skillful in how to manifest. So therefore, it's your sense of presence everywhere is called your beatific body, and it's like pure light. You are like pure diamond light, but through prisms of things, rainbows of light. You are infinite rainbows, and that's called your sambhoga kaya. And sambhoga, like it sounds, means thorough joy. You know, and I call it beatific body. That's your beatific body. And then that body is also sort of omnipresent. And so therefore, in a way, it experiences itself as one with all beings. So it experiences itself enjoying being infinite nirvana in the molecules and cells and subatomic light energies of every being. So therefore, the beings can't perceive it. So then you have the ability to shape out of this infinite energy more coarse type of embodiments that can be perceived by beings as a separate being that they can then relate to. And that's called Nirmanakaya, or emanation body. And so the Shakyamuni historical Buddha was an emanation of what beings could see as if it was a separate person. And so when Vimalakirti went to see him, he was meeting an emanation body, but he didn't feel there was any distance between himself and Shakyamuni, because of the knowing about the bliss body and the reality body, you know, the nirvana body of the, do you follow me? So you can't see that because it is you. And actually we, right now, here and now, according to that, because time is totally reachable by such an awareness, as well as space, you know, the Buddha experiences himself as us 2,500 years later, sitting in a class talking about what Buddhahood might be, to become inspired to move in the general direction, toward greater happiness, in other words. So do you follow what I'm saying, sort of imaginatively? Because that's what, well, you see, we don't feel we're one with Shakyamuni Buddha 2,600 years ago sitting under a tree in India. We don't. or after he died, wherever he went, after he left his meat space emanation. But he didn't die, because you don't die. Neither we die, nor does Buddha die, really. We have dying practice. That is, and we have already died innumerable times. And we will die again, of course, out of this meat space form, and we'll take other ones. So in a way, attaining Buddhahood is really it's not really, at some stage when we understand it, it's not even a choice. Because if you're living infinitely, you obviously want to be as optimally living infinitely, and the obvious optimal way of living infinitely is living as pure love. Wouldn't you say? Surely it wouldn't be living as like a frustrated, incompetent president of the United States. It wouldn't be, just even a God who is like apart from a bunch of people left in hell. That's not that because you know that they're there. They're very intelligent. Gods are super intelligent. That's not that great. But a being that is everything and sees the excellent, exquisite freedom and blissfulness of everything, and doesn't ignore that others don't see that, and feels optimally capable of introducing them at whatever evolutionary speed they are capable of being introduced, which is the only thing that slows it down. That would be a much better way of being, wouldn't it? The best gardener in the world with the awesome greenhouse and the best fertilizer, they just can't go and take a rose bush seed and just rip it into a rose bush with beautiful flowers. It has to grow, it can be accelerated, but, if in the best circumstances, but it has to become its own flower, And a being that's flowering consists of opening to embrace all other beings, has to want to do that itself. If you went and tried to insist, it would feel it was being ripped open. Type of thing. You get it? So Shakyamuni Buddha, in other words, is right here with us, and not only him, all Buddhas are right here with us. And there are female ones, male ones. There are Buddhas that are like, it can appear like inanimate objects, if necessary. If the Jedi warriors were Buddhas, Obi-Wan, flying there with Luke in that middle movie of the original ones, when the Death Star destroyed a planet with, interestingly, 7 billion people on it. And then there was a disturbance in the Force because 7 billionth planet was destroyed. Remember that? But if he was a Buddha, he would be the planet that would catch all 7 billion immediately and install them back in school. Basically. Can't install them in Buddhahood. If anybody else could install us in Buddhahood, we'd all be installed, believe me. But can install them in an environment in which they can maximize their evolution toward that, right? Evolution accomplished by the wisdom of self-transcendence and the compassion of altruism. Two kinds of selflessness, right? The one that we know in English, selflessness of Florence Nightingale, and then the selflessness we're learning about, which is the metaphysical, scientific selflessness, that there's no non-relational component of our being, either at the soul level or at the meat space level, at the subtle mind level, at the energy level. It's all relational. Actually, the discovery of the discovery of relativity actually is what it is. It's a physical discovery, actually. It's a physicist's discovery. Buddha was a physicist. Okay, so that's Buddhahood. So and then this book, why I picked this book for this year, this semester's thing, the Sublime Continuum, is partly because I edited it a lot. It was translated by a student of mine who has been, since he graduated about 10 years ago, I forget how long ago. Bo Jiang is his name. He has a nickname Marty, and he lives in Shanghai mostly. And he translates from Tibetan this kind of work into Chinese. And he translated part of it into English for his thesis, and then I kind of made him and urged him, not knowing what the future would hold for him, to do it into English. But by the time that we were doing the other parts that he didn't do for his thesis, and he'd sort of forgotten a little bit of his English. He'd been just working for 15 years just in his mother tongue. And so I had to edit it a lot. And I learned a lot from doing it too. And I really read the whole thing carefully, like the way you have to do when you're dealing with it as a translation effort. And I really got into this thing about, the role of the relationship of knowledge and faith, reasonable faith, and knowledge is very powerful. Because, the idea, the deep idea here, which we'll look at in all of its permutations in the class, and next class will be on Dharma on the 20th, is that from a Buddha's point of view, we are already the same being as him, her, it, them, whatever you want to say. None of it is exact, So from our point of view, we're totally different. But we may admire it, or we may like it, or whatever, but we're not that, right? But on the other hand, supposedly we are ignorant, or we are deluded and confused, and he's enlightened. Or she, they're female Buddhas. He, she, it, they're enlightened. And so, which is more correct? Maybe we are less correct. So in that sense, what our Buddha nature is, that part, maybe there's a part of us that doesn't agree with our conscious idea that I'm not Buddha. Maybe there's a part of us that feels at home with Buddha or something like that, in the presence of Buddha, that has an instinct about it. It's something like a positive instinct. And a human being as a social animal does have a positive instinct. We do. Those guys, those anthropologists who try to pretend that the basic nature of the human is violent and aggressive and murderous and so forth, they are funded by militaristic societies in which they live, for sure. Because that view of human nature definitely then creates police state, imperialism, police state, militarized state. It does, when everybody believes that. But the Buddhist view is that the human being is of course we have unconscious, we have eros and thanatos, Freud was correct. We have murderousness and, greed and obsessiveness and lust in us. But they are in conversation in there. But we have this other instinct that all of our things are better served by relating, because we're born in a womb. We're cared for by stranger mothers who are kind to us. Kindness makes us, so that creates an instinct that we have. And that's why, in order to make somebody at Paris Island into a killer Marine or Navy SEAL or something, they really have to beat them up and brutalize them really badly to shut down that gentleness instinct that the human being has, which is there in your fingertips. Your fingertip is not a murderous claw. If you try to claw somebody, you break your fingernail, as you guys know, pretty much. I mean, you can make a scratch or two, But it's not really, we didn't choose a birth form of true aggression. Or we'd be lions and tigers. Okay? Any question? Yes?
I just would like to...
You have to speak up on my... It's okay. I guess we don't have a mic, so I'll repeat whatever you say for the people not here.
I just want to share that Einstein wrote a letter to his daughter.
Yes.
Expressing the fact that he felt love was a strong force.
Yes.
As strong as the forces the weak forces.
He did, and there's even a thing where there's a letter that floats around by Einstein about how if he were to be of any kind of religion, he would be a Buddhist. But then there are people who debunk those kind of nice things, and I don't know who's right. But if you Google, you'll find people saying, oh, they say Einstein said this and that, but he didn't. So, but it doesn't matter. He himself discovered relativity partially. Actually, the idea of speed of light is an absolute still, you see, because he's still a materialist. He insists on being a materialist. So he doesn't discover complete relativity, which goes at a level of subtlety that only mind can reach there, kind of, as a super subtle energy form. But anyway, it's very nice that he did it, and we love Einstein. And actually, apparently, quite a few people loved Einstein. I actually met Einstein once when I was a little boy. I tried to get a dime by mowing his lawn in Princeton. I did. And actually, we were trying to maneuver it into a quarter or 2 dimes. My friend who I was visiting, because I didn't live in Princeton, but I was weekend visiting a friend who lived in Princeton, and schoolmate. And he said, hey, come on, I sometimes mow Mr. Einstein's lawn. He gives me a dime. If we both go, maybe he'll give us each a dime. And then those days you could get 2 scoops for a dime. So we went over there, and we were so disappointed. He was mowing it himself. And with a push mower, not a motor mower. This was in the 50s, And he was pushing it, and he was happy as a bee. So you can tell that he knew love was a strong force. It was a very hot day, and he had his sprinklers on, and he was happily mowing, running right through the sprinklers. And he had a pair of shorts and a kind of one of those T-shirts, with just a loop here, not a sleeve, And he was like, he was Mr. Happy. So then he saw 2 oh, sorry, that's my hearing aid part. He saw these 2 dejected boys who went over and sat on his front step and looked all dejected because we weren't going to get this ice cream. And he realized why. So he then let us mow somewhat and gave us each a dime. And we had 2 scoop ice cream cones. That's my encounter with Einstein. God does not play dice, but Einstein gives out dimes. Thank you very much, everyone. And those of you on the camera, if you're there, thank you. And, this book is I'm sorry, it's a Columbia Press book. It's an academic book. It's expensive. I don't have, maybe I'll try to Xerox for those who can't afford to buy it. It was translated by Mr. Bojang, printed by our institute, and by Tibet House is a co-publisher of it. So if anybody does buy it, it's helpful. And it's worth reading, long thing. But I will maybe try to give you a few passages that you can have online to read, in case you can't afford it in your library. Or get your library to order it. That would also be good. Okay, it's called the Sublime Continuum and its Explanatory Commentary by Maitreya Natha and the Noble Asanga. And there's the Super-Commentary is by a disciple of Tsongkhapa, 15th century Tibetan Lama called Gyaltsab Dharma Rinchen. Introduced and translated by Bojang. B-O, new word, J-I-A-N-G. Okay? Good evening. Thank you all.
To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership and about upcoming trips, geographic expeditions, please visit bobthurman.com. Tashi Delek.